Welcome everyone to the LinkedIn Collective Studio at B2Believe New York City. I'm Rachel Rickles, Content Solutions Manager at LinkedIn. And today, we're going to be talking about how building a brand and generating demand can work together, which is critical in today's business landscape. I'm joined today by Andrew Seidman, COO and co-founder of Digital Reach Agency, and Emma Cowdray, Head of Client Solutions at Wired Consulting, part of Wired Magazine. Welcome.
Thanks.
Thank you, Rachel.
Awesome, so thank you both for being here. Today, we're going to kick things off. Emma, I'm going to start with you. So with your experience at Wired, could you share a little bit from your perspective how brand building and demand generation have evolved over the years, especially in light of tech trends?
Absolutely. I think, one, it's such a big area and there's been so many changes in recent years, but I think for me there are three main areas. It's around marketplace. It's become so much more digitized. We're seeing the role of social media platforms like LinkedIn having a massive influence on sort of appealing to audiences in real time. We're seeing sort of the rise in data collected so that we know where audiences are and how to appeal to them, which is leading to sort of way more personalized sort of outputs and creativity. We're also seeing sort of a proliferation of new platforms on the rise. And a few years ago we were talking about metaverse. How do we show up in the metaverse? That's sort of disappeared to some extent, but brands are still trying to work out where to show up and how to show up. And I think for brands, it's how do you cut through the noise? And technology on the one side provides so many opportunities to innovate, push boundaries, do something creative, exciting, and really connect with your audience on a different level. But we can't also not think about sort of the other side of tech. It's creating more content than ever before. We've got, I think I was reading a stat about we're encountering between 6,000 and 10,000 ads every day. That's a huge amount. And of course, with AI, we've got the challenges of sort of deep fakes. And I think even, with the election this year, that's going to be a massive thing when putting out content. So I think what that's meaning is that customers or audiences are just crying out for content they can trust, brands they can trust, and they're not sure what is true and what is false. And I think that is the key really for sort of really differentiating this market, is around sort of really having that authentic voice, thinking about as a starting point, brand building, what am I doing? What is my brand all about? Why do I operate in the space that I do? Because communicating that value and sort of the bigger picture thinking and the challenges that you're solving is so important, and that is your competitive edge that allows you to connect and build trust with your audiences. And I think from a wide consulting point of view, that is exactly what we help our clients do. Is when it comes to trends, it's having and finding that authentic voice to really navigate this ever increasingly complex world. It's building a trusted voice that customers and sort of audiences really want nowadays, to really sort of cut through the noise, provide them with educational, inspirational content within sort of the B2B space, and seeing a shift more towards, I think, brand building. 60% is what I read about sort of the spend, and 40% more towards demand generation. So
speaking of 60% brand, 40% demand, Andrew, I'm really curious, how do you think about this balance between brand and demand when you're building out marketing strategies for your customers from Digital Reach Agency?
Yeah, well, I would say just piggybacking on some of the macro changes that we've seen with, not just with AI, but also like macro financial elements with inflation and change in interest rates. It's actually made venture money much more difficult to come by, and has meant that you need to be far more efficient and competitive with your campaigns today than you had to in the pre-COVID world. So you combine that heightened competitiveness just in general with the sort of massive flood of content that's now incredibly cheap and easy to provide from AI-related generative AI, you end up in a world where there's a ton of noise, and you have this big emphasis on needing to be highly efficient while also still having brand resonance. Your brand has to actually stick out from the noise, but you can't spend all your money on it because there's not that much leeway or wiggle room financially to get money with the current interest rates the way they are. Puts advertisers in a really challenging spot. But I would say if there's any kind of orientation that I would take from this, it's that you have to lean into brand and product market fit. You see a lot of companies imagining that they can go capture any demand that they want, but that the demand they're actually capturing is actually their brand value that they're translating into, let's say, leads or MQLs or opportunities, whatever it might be. But if you don't actually have that brand value, you can't go capture it. So we're working with a client or a company right now, for example, that really wants to capture a bunch of demand in a certain area, but they're unsuccessful at it because they don't have brand resonance. They haven't claimed that spot for their brand. So it's a really tricky balance, but I think today, especially with generative AI and sort of macroeconomic condition, finding product market fit and building a brand that targets your audience and where you want to target them and capturing that is a critical precondition for getting to the actual demand generation component of it later. So I think the subject of this from brand to demand is really well thought through, which is that you have to kind of start with that brand focus, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Now, a follow-up question to that. When you're advising customers around investing in brand, that you need to have product market fit, that you need to have brand salience and resonance, how do you advise your customers that may be, and this is a question to either of you, that may be resistant to investing there, even knowing that it is going to help in the long run?
Incentives are weird. So everyone we talk to would like to have more opportunities tomorrow, more pipeline revenue tomorrow. And so there's a ton of focus and emphasis on just put more money into demand generation and capturing at the end of the funnel. And this can be a really difficult thing for, let's say, a CMO who's in a position where they need to hit quarterly or annual targets, to have the foresight or the long-term vision, I should say, of investing in brand for the big picture. But this is one of those, as a marketer, one of those big pills you have to swallow if you want to be successful. Like having a great website, it's really expensive. It's really hard to have a great website. Do you want to pay for it? Well, if you don't pay for it, your competitors are going to defeat you. But it's also an unfortunate item on your budget sheet. So there's a lot of things like that, but I think the most successful organizations we've worked with, some of whom we started with them when they were small startups and are now global enterprise leaders with billions and billions of dollars. One of the key differences in their go-to-market was that they took the full funnel and holistic approach, where they emphasized not just capturing bottom funnel demand, but they were thinking about, what is my funnel going to look like in 6 months? What is it going to look like in a year? Some of those really big buying cycles might take several years. And so I think building that in is a critical component strategically for the entire C-suite of these organizations, not just the CMO, but the CEO has to be really on board with a go-to-market vision that emphasizes developing the brand and not just capturing whatever's in the funnel right now.
Emma, anything to add?
A lot of the focus nowadays is trying to sort of push towards demand generation because it's instant. But if your target audience doesn't actually understand what you do, but you're pushing out a product and trying to say, hey, buy it, you can't expect them to sort of go for it, because I think the expectation and why brand building has become so important is because it's no longer just about your product. I think AI is a brilliant example these days. It's actually sort of, what is your wider vision? What are the challenges that you're trying to solve for your customers? Why do you exist? And why do you do what you do? What is that wider, bigger picture thinking that I think is so important to be communicated these days? And then it's looking at kind of, how does that disseminate across the funnel? How does that disseminate across sort of all your tactics? But it's starting with sort of building brand trust, expressing your sort of why you deserve to play in this bigger picture effectively, and providing value in the content that you provide and through storytelling as well.
And building on that a little bit, trust and transparency play really hand in hand.
Yeah.
So, in this age of trust, transparency, the customers kind of expect that from brands today. So how do you create a really cohesive experience from that kind of brand building trust aspect down to that demand generation, I've got them as a lead or an MQL or what have you? Like, how do you ensure that your strategies kind of meet all of those needs?
Yeah, I mean, I guess from looking at it from sort of a wide consulting perspective, I think you've got to start by believing those values yourself. I think it's nowadays, if you can't tell a brand, hey, be authentic, sort of be all about your values and this bigger picture thinking, if you don't operate with integrity and transparency. And I think for us as a team, that is so important. And that has to drive everything we do. Not to mention the fact that we're part of Wired. Wired is a massive, credible, authoritative brand that is, talking about the trends every single day and has been for the last 30 plus years. So, when we're creating co-branded thought leadership, we've got to be so careful because we have to be really thinking about the research that we do. Is it deep rooted? What are the sources that we're bringing in? As well as, because all of what we do harnesses that expertise, that wired network. So we have to, really sort of engage with our experts to make sure that they really are the experts sort of at the cutting edge. That they're not just talking about it. They're not just saying, hey, I'm an expert in AI. It's like, okay, what is your expertise? How are you doing something differentiated? And in terms of kind of looking at it from the client side as well, we've got to hold them to our values as a team of delivering excellence, cutting through the noise, creating something new and exciting.
Yeah. I mean, we talked about that a little bit earlier around like AI. Every company wants to be an AI company, right? But how does that actually show through in the content you're creating, the way you're showing up, your values as a company itself? That has a big role to play. So, in thinking about a cohesive strategy, it kind of makes me think a little bit about storytelling, right? A beginning, middle, and end, which is not too dissimilar when we think about a full funnel approach, right? If we want to marry these two analogies. But in that thinking, Andrew, can you walk us through how you architect a full funnel campaign so that you're not just generating demand, but you're reinforcing that brand message, that trust, that authenticity?
Yeah, I mean, it starts with deeply knowing yourself. It's actually quite a bit of work. It sounds very intuitive when she says it because it's very well crafted and it's well understood. It's quite a bit of work for a lot of organizations to actually know or answer the question of what are your values or what really makes you different or makes you special. And so I think the first thing we do in crafting a great campaign is we actually need to get that brand work. Our agency didn't used to be a brand agency. We actually started off just in capturing demand at the bottom of the funnel because that was where the money was and that was like the easiest way to prove our value and all these things. We kept getting in trouble when the campaigns didn't go well. So we had to follow them up the ladder until we eventually got to, oh, you don't really have a brand mission. Like, who are you? And so we became a brand agency because we knew we needed to align brand at the first stage of the process before we could do all the other things successfully. So part one is this kind of brand strategy, brand mission, brand resonance. Like, what is the message we're going to put out in your content to the rest of the world? Once we have a clear idea of that, of really where your resonance lies, sometimes we have to go build it. So a tool like LinkedIn, for example, is really effective at introducing your audience to your brand as a possible solution. So sometimes we'll have to go build the brand in that way. But so we'll start with understanding the brand, and then we'll look at, okay, these are the areas where you already have a lot of brand resonance. These are the areas where you probably need to develop more brand resonance, or share of voice is often a metric that we use. And then once you've got a clear sense of where your audience lives and where your brand is strong, where your brand is weak, then you can do all these, kind of more tactical things like constructing your content engine, like what is the content you're going to use to spread your message. And then ultimately, once you've got all those things aligned with great content, then you're getting into the actual spreading of the message. So that is what a lot of folks think of as a marketing campaign. is they're thinking, oh, I'm going to take my content, I'm going to put it on LinkedIn, I'm going to make sure I have a landing page to capture traffic on Google search or something like that. But there's all of this pre-work that has to be done to make those things effective. And it really needs to be, there's even a few more technical things behind the scenes, like your website has to work, your data has to be organized, like all these things.
So.
But at the end of the day, it's really this, it's this pre-work that happens before an ad ever goes live, before an event ever happens, that helps people in your organization and your customers understand and believe that you have these values that make you special. So Wired is a great brand because people both in Wired and Wired's customers believe that they have high integrity, that they have high expertise, they have high authenticity. And if they didn't have that, it doesn't matter how great their campaigns would be, no one would care.
I think it's a great point.
It's a great advocate. I love it.
I think you said a magic word here, though, metric. And so I do want to talk a little bit about measurement, because I think that's on the minds of a lot of marketers today, is how do we measure the success of our marketing? And I think part of that comes back to brand, right? Share of voice is a great way to measure, but like, what are some of the other components that you look at when you are advising customers on measuring their brand to demand strategies?
Yeah, I'll even start by saying that brand metrics are historically much more slippery than the demand generation, like true bottom of funnel metrics, where you can just say, I put in $1, I got back $2, that was really nice. I'd like to do that as often as I can. Share of voice is an amazing one because it shows you, without really having to pay much money for this information, you just get to kind of see where am I in a certain set of, let's say, like keywords or themes that I want to be resonant for, like do people recognize me or not? So that's a decent one. There are a bunch of other brand metrics, though, that are pretty useful. I like to look at, actually LinkedIn is a great tool for seeing how folks move through the funnel with a sequential retargeting program, which is to say I might start an audience that is my unaware audience that's got 100,000 people in it or something like that. And I can actually watch and see how many of them move into my next audience down, which is like my aware audience, by seeing impressions, clicking on ads, watching videos, things like that. So that's a decent way of seeing like what percentage is now in my aware audience, my aware and engaged audience relative to my unaware audience. There's also like brand recall, assisted or unassisted brand recall. These are often more like focus groupy kinds of brand metrics. But I think the biggest ones that we see in an account-based marketing context, which is where we do a lot of our work, is actually just going to be what is the net account engagement. So if you start to see accounts that you really want to enter, that don't really have anybody who's engaged with you, what is the movement in terms of increased engagement? That might be the number of people engaging, it might be the quality or high intent qualities of that engagement. So there's quite a few metrics that we use, although I would say the fastest one to immediately tell if you're in market or not in market is just share of voice, just like right out the gate.
Interesting.
It takes time. The ROI is much longer. I think I was talking about earlier today, it's like over 192 days. That's a long time, and I think in the current environment, it's people sort of are hoping for that quick win, but I think a lot of where brand excels is actually its intrinsic value. It's what we find a lot of our clients come to us to work with on is around how do they raise their voice. So it's tying in with sort of voice in market, for example, and the metrics that you were talking about from that perspective. But I think it's how do I raise my voice on the trends shaping our world? How do I shift perceptions? How do I cut through the noise in an authentic way? And how do I be seen as a thought leader at the forefront of payments, of sort of digital supply chain, of all of these different sort of really important factors, because that is fundamentally sort of that intrinsic value. And I think one of the partnerships that we did sort of with LinkedIn as a content credit partner as well was for JP Morgan. And I think that's sort of a case in point around the value for them is intrinsic. They wanted to be seen at the forefront of payments. And because this is wanting to raise awareness around what payments really are, it's not just about a transaction, but actually it's so much more. And so wanted to work with us to really sort of cut through the noise and create something that was a bit unexpected. So we created, of all things, which is not the easiest when it comes to metrics, a magazine, a Comb-branded magazine. That can then be sort of replicated and disseminated sort of across digital channels. But for them, it's creating something that really showcased their expertise, that sort of cut down these complex topics into something that could be understood. We're talking about payments in space, which is not what you expect, but that allowed them to showcase to their clients, connect with their audience, that we're thinking about the bigger picture here. We're thinking ahead, and that value is truly intrinsic. And I think that it's creating something that they can get behind, that their clients can get behind, that gets them famous internally. I think that's a lot of what I think the metrics sometimes don't always capture, but is really important to gaining sort of market share and mental availability being key ones.
I would just add one quick thing too, which is a lot of organizations really struggle to attribute well. And so there's a lot of pressure towards the attribution that you have, which might be like a single touch about how, what led to an opportunity or to lead generation. But a real authentic picture of the effective brand is actually going to influence all of the activities that happen for a long time. And so something like a magazine might resonate with people in a non-digital space. It might resonate in a digital space, and all those touches might be lost in a lot of organizations' attribution modeling. So the question of like, what metric should you use? Well, probably the first thing you should do is like actually make sure you can properly attribute what's really happening in your ecosystem before you put too much weight on the numbers that you're getting. Like, I think that's probably a brilliant brand play. It's just a lot of organizations would be too afraid to do it.
Yeah,
because they can't prove it. You know what I mean?
Exactly. But I think why it's such an exciting time. Is like,
it is
to really sort of step out of your comfort zone.
And I feel like I could talk to you both all day about this. I feel like we're just getting started. Unfortunately, we have to wrap. I know that's it for us today. But thank you so much, both of you, for being here today. Really appreciate your time, your expertise, your insights. And to our audience, we hope that you have found this session very valuable and appreciate your time today.